Welcome to the course Digital Transformation and Technological Innovation. So, we are into our second module, that is digital infrastructure. So, let us start from where we left in the last session. So, we were talking about the quality of a screen image and how this can be understood. So, we talked about that images, they are displayed, they are composed of a million or more pixels, right? And we talked about that resolution is the way to measure it. So, what is resolution? Essentially total number of pixels contained in the display, right. So, now display size is another factor that can affect the viewing quality, quality of a screen image, right, because if we are keeping the same pixel resolution, so on a small screen it will look sharper, but if the same pixel resolution, that means same number of pixels. Remember, pixels, number of resolution is number of pixels contained in the display. So, if we are taking a small screen, same number of pixels would actually be distributed across a small screen. So, the image will look sharper, and if the same number of pixels are distributed across a larger screen, then the image would be slightly less sharper than what it would be in a small screen, right. So, why this is happening? Same number of pixels being spread out over a large area. So, therefore, larger screen it will be slightly less sharper, right. So, moving on, then next thing is another output device is printer, right. So, we will mainly talk about the quality of a printer output. So, let us understand that part, right. Printers, all of us are regular users of that. So, we understand that part. So, the focus is on how to select, this is also a computer hardware. So, how to select a printer. So, the quality of printer output is more important, just like the quality of a screen image is important, while resolution and screen display size is important, while we are going for a display, right. So, what are the factors? So, one is printer speed, that might be important, right, number of pages printed per minute. So, how fast that printer is able to churn out pages. So, that speed is obviously important. So, that is expressed using ppm, that is pages printed per minute, right. Then the second thing here also is the resolution, because again we are talking about a output device. So, resolution is now slightly different definition in case of a printer output, that we are saying that total number of dots printed per inch, right. So, which is expressed using DPI, dots printed per inch. So, we look at the total number of that that defines the resolution. So, if you prefer a better quality printout, then you would like to purchase a printer with higher DPI, right, or if you have those options in your existing printer, then you would like to select a higher DPI printer if you want a better quality printout, right. So, a printer with higher DPI prints more clearly than a lower DPI one, right. Then what are other factors that can be there? So, next factor in case of a printer is printer cartridge, right. So, what is printer cartridge? What is there to be considered? Number of page outputs before replacement, right, because this is directly connected to your cost, right. So, how many pages can actually a printer cartridge can be used right before it needs replacement. So, this becomes an important factor. Now, there are multiple technologies underlying printers, for example laser printer or inkjet printer, right. So, given those multiple options, the cartridge also are different, and so laser cartridge, and therefore the laser printer you would be using. So, laser cartridge is better than an inkjet cartridge. So, how? In terms of number of pages, in terms of number of pages that are that could be printed using a laser printer, using a laser cartridge. So, therefore, more number of pages. So, the laser printer would be more productive in terms of number of pages, churning out number of pages using just one printer cartridge in comparison to inkjet one. So, these are the kind of consideration that one can have. Then we move on to the next one, that is 3D printer. So, 3D printer is slightly complex technology that we are talking now. So this is also an output device, right, but the printer can be used in generic and varied context, right, whenever we need a physical copy of a document, right. But 3D printer, there are applications at the industrial level also, right. So this becomes a much more important technology and much more complex. So what 3D printer is about? A digital design artifact containing the physical object's 3D model that is taken as an input in case of a printer. So we are talking about how a 3D printer works. So a digital design artifact we need, and that means the object that we want to create a 3D print. So we need to have 3D model of that objects in a digital artifact form. So digital design artifact. So the design artifact or digital design artifact of a object's 3D model that we need to have, that is sent as input to the slicer program in the 3D printer. So there is a slicer program that plays an important role in a 3D printer. So what this program does, this program slices the 3D model, the digital design artifact of the having the 3D model of the object. So this program slices the model to produce hundreds of thin horizontal layers, right. So it produces hundreds of those layers, slices the 3D objects and produces hundreds of thin horizontal layers, right. And a set of precise coordinates, and instructions for motors and heaters. So those thin layers along with the coordinates, right, what will comes first and what will come later, that is important in terms of because you would eventually be layering out that particular model, right, the 3D model you will be layering out, you will be depositing the material using the coordinates, determining the order which layer will come and which layer will come on top, right. So a set of precise coordinates instructions for motors and heaters. So then the next step would be that printer would deposit material. So material, the number of options that can be there depending on the kind of 3D printer that you have. So deposits material like melted plastic, resin or powder. So different kind of materials can be used, and this deposit will be done by the printer to form the first layer we have already created using the slicer program. Then move slightly to add the next layer, then on top of that first layer another layer would be added directly on top. So in this way, layer by layer, that is why we did the slicing and got the coordinates and everything. So layer by layer will keep on depositing material and eventually the 3D object shape will be formed. So each new layer fuses to the one below until the object is complete. So that fusion will keep on happening, those small thin layers are there and we keep on depositing layer after layer, and eventually the it will fuse because the material is such, and the heating and other thing that 3D printer would be doing, right. So until the object is complete. So this is how 3D printer works, right. Now what are the applications in terms of industrial application of 3D printer? So we can look at 3D printer firms which are providing 3D printers for different industries. So the most popular one is 3D Systems, which is mainly catering to medical, dental, industrial use cases, right. Then Stratasys is there, which is which is a polymer firm, which is catering to aerospace, healthcare, right. And then we have Bamboo Lab, which is focusing on the consumer segment, where lots of consumers might be interested in creating mementos, other artifacts for gifts, for distributing during various events. So they would like their custom artifacts to be 3D printed, right. So it might be unique, or all the all the objects would also be same. So Bamboo Lab caters to that kind of market. Then Creality is there, that is also focusing on consumer. Then other firms like Axometry is there, which is like an online marketplace, and there you can get both the 3D printer firms and or the firms which are actually providing services for 3D printing, and the people who want those services. So online marketplace for sourcing on demand manufactured parts for prototyping and large scale production. So large scale production you are doing, so you can do on demand. This is kind of online. This is a kind of online marketplace where you can source those parts that you need for your large scale productions, and there would be there would be regular farms plus farms which would be giving the 3D printing services, right. So these are some of the industrial use cases for 3D printer. So let's move on. So what are 3D consumer industries? So already quite clear from the previous slide, but still aerospace firms they benefit, right, because there are lots of objects which might not be regularly used, but sometimes specific there would be a very particular specification for those objects and they might be needed. So it might be better to get that 3D printed, right. So aerospace firms, auto manufacturers, right. So as the 3D printing technology improves, the cost of the printer and the cost of providing services might go down, right, because the material that is being used, that might also, when the economies of scale kick in, then the cost in a period of time will go down along with the improvement in the 3D production technology, right. So right now aerospace firms, auto manufacturers and other design intensive companies, they are the main consumer industries for 3D printer. Then sometimes architectural design firms, they might also be interested in, because some architectures that they have created for showcasing, they would like to get that get a 3D printed model of the architecture, so that they can showcase their different architectures, maybe for marketing, maybe for promotion, right. So or just the display, right. So architectural design firms might also be interested in. Then for the consumer segment, as we talked about, so print on demand merchandise, right, different events, lots of merchandise might be needed. So eBay is doing that, and it has 3D printing partners, and therefore print on demand merchandise, that kind of businesses also there, right. So general consumer can also use the services of eBay and 3D printing partners. So that's about 3D printer, the consumer part, and previously we talked about the producers, the companies which are providing 3D printers and services, and this is consumer part. Moving on, now next that we discuss is classification of computers. Now there are lots of different kinds of computers that we interact with in our day to day work, professional work or regular work, personal uses or enterprise use. So we will talk each one of them, because organization, they have to spend a lot more money into these into computer hardware, and their IT budget spending goes into all these kind of products, whether for regular use or for the enterprise use or the business use, right. So let's understand some of the factors that could be important. So first we'll talk about the handheld computers, right. So within handheld computers there are various categories that are there in terms of products in the market. So one is rugged mobile computer. Rugged mobile computer, slightly industrial grade, right, because in industry the durability of the device is also important. It should be water resistant and dust resistant, and eventually the longevity of the the device should be on the higher side. So industrial grade devices are there. What are the use cases? Logistics, warehousing, retail. So you'll see many employees, many sales personnel of these companies into logistic, warehousing, retail. You will often see them having handheld computers, right. Leading firms, provider, Zebra, Honeywell, Data Logic, Panasonic. These are some of the companies which are providing industrial grade devices, rugged mobile computer, the handheld computers, right. Next is the gaming segment, gaming handheld PC. So for gaming, there are lots of gamers who would like to play games on the go, right, because there is sufficient internet coverage all over the place, and therefore people can just if they have a portable device, they can just log on to the websites or might use the installed games in the device for playing games on the go. So the handheld computers, the second category, gaming handheld PCs, they also sell to these enthusiastic gamers. So what are the leading firms in this case? The leading firms in this case Valve, Asus, ROG, and ROG, and Lenovo, MSI. So these are some of the leading firms which provide gaming handheld PC. Then moving on, the generic handheld computers. The generic handheld computers for regular users are actually tablet, PC, and PDA, right? And they are essentially, as I said, they are for personal productivity. So all of us, we might be reading a book, preparing for exam, preparing for test, or for our own research, or on into different domains we might be using it. So while traveling, we want to have the benefit of portability of these devices. So while traveling, also on the go, also we would like to go through some of the ebooks, some of the content, or watch audios, videos, and other things, right. So for personal productivity, tablet, PC, and PDA, they provide the portability. So what are the leading firms? So leading firm in this case, Apple, Microsoft, Samsung. So these are the leading firms, and there are lots of tablets, products, tablet series that are being offered by some of these firms, right. Moving on, next category is laptop computers. So within laptop also there are different segments in terms of uses, right. So we look at that. So first one is enterprise/business. So in this particular case, the users are the focus is on executive users, the people who are working in the company, and for the company's work, they might be given laptops from the company, or they might have their own. So they will prefer laptops which cater to enterprise/business category. So essentially these products, these laptops would cater to these executive users. So what would be the characteristics to consider? Durability of the laptop, because the company would not like to spend again and again in terms of giving these laptops to their employees. So durability, security, company's data might also be there, employees using laptops, data is there, right. So security, they like to keep a check on that. So that is also on the hard side. Warranties, again firms would like to optimize or reduce the cost of maintaining these laptops, because company given laptops, so the maintenance might also have to be done by the company. So warranties and all these becomes important factors. So which are the leading firms catering to this segment? These are those typical ones: Lenovo, Dell, HP, which are the ones which provide the laptop computers in this category. Moving on, laptop computers under second one is consumer/ultra portable. So while we talked about the handheld devices and the portability of those devices, but even in the case of laptop also, the target users, they might also have a desirability for portability. So focus is on student users, because student users, they have to from home to college or university or school or to other places, they have to travel. So they from classroom to hostel, and many such movement they keep on doing. So therefore portability becomes important for them in a day to day basis, right. So hybrid workers, similarly other workers which are also in a similar kind of setting, so they might also benefit from the laptops under this segment. Battery life is important, because you do not get time to charge it back again. So you take your computer, and for the whole day at least it should work. So the battery life is also important in this segment. Leading firms: Apple, HP, Asus. So these are the firms which cater to which are selling best sellers in this particular category. Then moving on, next category is gaming high performance. So there are youth who would like to take the advantage of slightly bigger screen. They prefer bigger screen than the handheld the gaming tablet, right. So therefore for the bigger screen they might go for the laptop. So the focus would be on high performance, and in gaming, because there is such a fast paced action that might be happening. So high refresh screen, so that the gamer is able to respond to the situation that is there in a game. So high refresh screen should be there. GPUs, parallel processing, because a lot of images are being shown, so that faster image processing, because scene is changing from one setting to another setting to another setting. So GPUs will speed up that processing. So this gaming high performance image processing is needed. So for these gamers, the kind of laptops that are needed are slightly different. Leading firms Asus, MSI, Lenovo, so these are some of the firms which are catering to which are best sellers in this particular segment. Moving on, next is premium or creative category. So these are again this is again coming under, we are talking about the laptop computers only. So within this category is premium, creative. So the focus is on professionals. So professionals essentially we are considering people with slightly higher income group, and they also might be into creative industries or creative work. So therefore premium / creative. So this in this segment the professionals, the users might be looking for support in creative tasks, right, pro design, because they might be working on some art or some digital artifact which is representation of some design, some other art, right, that they might be coming up, or they might be coming up with a nice presentation in their business and to impress the stakeholders. So the focus is on the creative aspect, the design aspect. Leading firms in this case is Apple, Microsoft, right, because lots of software that would be needed to create these artifacts, creative artifacts, digital artifacts. Some of these companies might already have those there, right. So this is the last category. Then next one is desktop computers. Now within desktop computers also we can understand this by dividing into multiple categories catering to different kinds of users. So in this case desktop computer, first one is regular / business computing task. So more often than not when we talk about desktop computers, essentially we are talking about some regular or quite often the business computing task, right. Now the first category is all-in-one PCs, right. So all-in-one PCs, who would be interested in? So focus would be on offices, front desk environment where people are mainly responding to emails or sharing a few simple documents, right, word files, right. So for them instead of having too much of clutter, whatever little computing support that they need for their day to day work, that they might get from all-in-one PCs, right, AIO PCs. So leading firms HP, Acer, Dell in this particular segment, right. So focus office and front desk environment. Then the next category within desktop computer is again gaming desktop. Now gamers who wants to have experience, who wants to have experience on full-fledged games, bigger screen, high performance, more games with longer playtime requirement, graphics and other things, slightly higher RAM or is needed for certain games. So they might prefer the desktops over tablets or the gaming laptops or the gaming tablets, right. So gaming desktop, the focus is on maximum performance, GPUs and cooling, because you might end up playing, if you are using a gaming desktop you might be playing a game which is lasting for hours and therefore lot of heat would be generated. So GPUs would be required for image processing that goes with the gaming, but at the same time cooling also should be quite good so that for long hours users are able to play the games. So leading firms catering to this segment Asus, Dell, MSI, these are some of the firms which are catering to this gaming desktop segment. Moving on, business desktop, right. So this is another category, next category under desktop computers, business desktop. So in this particular case the focus is on high power, right, because this business desktop so the business computing would be slightly on the higher side. So it might be a regular executive working with the desktop computer for a longer period of time. So therefore and some intensive task also. So higher power, reliability, right, because intensive use would be there. So the reliability should also be there when you are doing the intensive use. So the desktop should be there should be no performance issues while you are working for hours, right. So that is the focus. So leading firms in this case again same three, Lenovo, Dell and HP. So these are the firms catering to the business desktop segment, right. Next is desktop computers Next category is tower or small form factor desktop. Now many times there would be certain employees who are actually power users, right. So they might be running some special design application or other detailing application or other engineering application, analysis, simulation, optimization, right. So those kind of software they might be running and they might have to work with that for a long period of time. So they need a desktop computer which will be able to support this, right. So tower small form factor desktops are designed for this. The main benefit is that these tower or small form factor desktop they actually have the flexibility to be upgraded. So upgradability is an important criteria here, because those applications, those engineering software, they might have their latest versions and the requirement might go up. As we can see in the case of Windows operating system, from Windows 10 to 11, and from, if we look at from Windows 8 to 10 and 11, the kind of hardware, minimum hardware requirement that is there, that has gone up, right. So therefore these people working with their computers which are having good lifespan, and they are working with a current version of application, next version is requiring slightly higher capacity, maybe in terms of RAM, memory, or in terms of processing capabilities, CPUs. So that upgradability, this option is very important, right. So the tower small form factor desktops, right, SFF desktops. So this is the focus. Leading firms, again same, Lenovo, Dell, HP, these are the leading firms catering to this segment. So with this we covered what we wanted to cover in this session. So what we have covered, a quick recap. Let's do a quick recap here. So we started with the quality of a screen image, right. We started with the quality of a screen image, resolution, display size, and then we came to the quality of printer output. Again we looked at printer speed, resolution, printer cartridge, right. These are some of the factors. We talked about 3D printer, how it works, the slicer program and layers, and then depositing materials and all that we talked about, and the fusing happens, we talked about this. Then we understood different firms that are operating in this space, online marketplace, axometry. Then consumer industries, we talked about 3D printer consumer industries, right, print on demand, eBay and their 3D printing partners, right. Then different types of handheld computers we talked about, rugged mobile computer, gaming handheld PC, tablet PC, PDA. So all this we talked about, different segments. Now within the laptop we talked about enterprise business segment, then consumer portable segment, and gaming high performance segment. Then we finally then premium creative segment within laptop. And finally we came to the desktop computers, regular business computing tasks, the AIOs, then gaming desktops, and then business desktop, and then finally tower slash FFF desktop. So with this we will like to end this session. We will continue about this module digital infrastructure in the next session. Thank you.